Alright guys, so as we move on through this project, there's many ways to code or program the game to do what you want. And the ways that I'm going to show you how to create the rest of this game is what I think is the easiest way. So it may not be the most robust or the best way to do it, but it's going to be the easiest way. And the whole idea is just to get you into programming and learning what the code does and how to manipulate it to make it do what you want. So with that said, what I did notice is that we now need to make sure that some of the code in the game controller is running appropriately. Right now, if you test your game, we get an error down here that says that an object reference is not set. And it's in the game controller start, and then it says line 15. So if we stop our playtest and go into our script, you'll notice on line 15, it's trying to find the game object that is called score text. Alright, well, in this scene we don't have a score text because that's only in our level scenes. So we need to basically adjust this code so it's only going to be run on those levels. Well, we're not really going to change any of this code right here. The easiest way to do it is to put in an if statement before it. So we're going to say if, and we're going to grab the entire application. So this grabs basically the game. We're going to say if the loaded level is greater than 1, then we want this code to run. So I'm going to go through and space these out, and I'll put in my end squiggly bracket. So what this refers to is the number that you put in the build settings. So you don't have to do this, but I'm just going to show you. I'm going to go up to File, Build Settings. Remember when we put our scenes in here? And the logo screen should actually be first, so I'm just going to drag this one above it. There we go. All right, but notice the index down over here. It starts at 0 instead of 1. So scene 0 is going to be the logo screen. That's the first one that pops up. And then go to the rollerball scene. So what we want, we're actually going to have a level screen in here that's going to have an index of 1. So our first level is actually going to start at 2. So by saying that the loaded level is greater than 1, it's going to skip the first two scenes, which is going to be our logo screen and our level select screen. And then it would be able to find these objects. We also need to change that down here when we created our shortcut. If you have this code in there, we also want it to say if C is pressed, and now if we want something else to be true at the same time, we use 2 ampersands. And now we're going to check another statement. And it's basically the same line of code, and the loaded level is greater than 1. So I'll save that, come back into Unity, get rid of this box, we don't need it, and check for errors. Doesn't look like we have any. Save my scene and my project, and now when I start the scene, we have no errors because it's no longer looking for those objects because it's not on the level screen. So now let's start into our button script. We're going to create a script for these 3 buttons so it has some functionality. So I'm going to create a new script in my scripts folder, C# script, and I'm going to call it button controller. I just have a habit of putting controller on the name of my script, and I'll open it up for editing. I don't think we're going to need the start or the update, so I'm just going to get rid of those. And we're going to create new methods. I'm going to save this first. Make sure there's no errors. Again, make sure the name of your script matches the class that's inside of the script. I'm going to go ahead and attach it to just my play button for right now. We'll attach it to the other buttons as well, but for right now, just for testing purposes, I'm going to leave it on just the play button. Alright, so now let's put in some code. We're going to create 2 new methods. First method is going to be called onMouseEnter, and again, be very careful of your capitalization. OnMouseEnter is all capitalized. So what this means is when the mouse or the cursor hovers over the GUI text, something is going to happen. Well, we want to actually show the player that they're hovering over the right spot, so we're going to change the GUI text component of that object. Remember, every game object has components, So this play button has a GUI text component, so that's why we're grabbing that. But then we want to grab this color property down here. We're going to change the color of the text. So we grab the component, dot, and then the property is color, as you can see right here. And we're going to set it equal to, and for right now we're just going to set it to a basic color. And once you hit the decimal point, you should get this box that pops in here. Feel free to pick any of these colors in here. Again, make sure you pick a color. Lerp is not a color. That is a way that you move objects across the screen at a certain pace. And I'm just going to choose red for right now. You can choose any color you want. And so I'll save this, come back to Unity. There's no errors. When we play test, and now when I move my cursor over the play button, it turns red. Notice when I pull my cursor off of the text, it does not change back to white. We need to actually program it to do that. So we'll stop play test, and very similar to how we did this method, we're going to create a new one on mouse. You guessed it, exit. Enter and exit our opponents. So we have GUI text.color, and we will change it back to white. Save this, go back to Unity, and hit play. Changes color when we're on it. When we let go, changes color. Alright. So maybe you don't want these basic colors. Right? There is a way to pick your color other than from that list. It gets a little bit more complicated, and I'll show you how to do that. I'll leave my basic color to white for right now. If you wanted a different color, when you choose your color in the color picker, when you just click on this box and open it up, notice you have the red, green, blue, and alpha values here. So the RGB is the values that actually chooses the color, and the A is your transparency. So notice when I bring this down, play starts to fade away. So the A value stands for alpha, and that's your transparency. 255 means it's totally opaque, meaning solid, you can see it. Whereas where you get closer and closer to 0, a value of 0 means it's totally transparent, you can't see it at all. And so I'm going to leave it at 255, and I'm going to pick a color that works with my scene. So what I'm actually going to do is pick my little eyedropper, so I can click this button right here, and now I can zoom around and pick the color that I want. And I can pick a color from this picture so that the color matches. So for example, I want this yellow color. However, I want the color to start off as white, and when the cursor comes over it, I want the yellow to display. Alright, so I'm going to change this back to white. And now if I want this yellow color, because I should have looked at it first, you can use this to pick your color. For example, I want this yellow. We'll need these values here. So make sure you write these down, or put them in your phone, or have some way to access them, remember them, because we'll need them later. Okay, and remember them as red, green, and blue. Change that back to white. Alright, so now, instead of changing to red when we hover over it, we want a new color, and we're going to create a color. When you put in your parenthesis, you'll see this box for IntelliSense. If you hit the up and down arrows, you can change it. We're going to use 2 of 3 there. We're going to choose a red, green, and blue color. So it's not as easy as just typing in the values. For example, when I type in these colors or these values here, and I hit save and come back into Unity, it doesn't give me an error, but it does not change the color to what it should be. Alright, that's because when you choose a color, it needs decimal values or float values. So I'm going to highlight the color here, and I'm going to show you what it looks like in the documentation. So we're going to go down to our constructor, because we're going to construct a new color with our G and B components or values. And make sure you're in C#. And what we're going to do is, actually the second one here, You could use 4 values to also say what type of transparency you want, but ours is going to be totally solid, so we're only going to use 3 values. We're going to use the second one. So we're going to create a new color, and then inside parentheses it only uses a value from 0 to 1. Right, so it uses a float value, where we have to come up with that float value. The way we're going to do that is a little bit of calculation. You wrote down your values before. My red, green, and blue values were 254, 247, and 54. Alright, so I'm going to take these values out, and I'll show the values on the right hand side. And now I'm going to use my calculator to figure out what these float values should be. So the first one's going to be red, and the maximum value you can have is 255. So I'm going to take what my value was, which is pretty darn close, and I'm going to divide it by 255. Whatever decimal it gives you here, you want to put in for your value. So mine's 0.996. I'm only going to use 2 decimal places, and this would round up to a 1. So I'm just going to go ahead and use a 1. I'm going to put an F after it to show that it is a float value, and I'll move on to the next one. So my second value for green was 247. I'm going to divide that by 255. And this one's a little further off. Looks like it's 0.97. Alright. I don't need to be super accurate, so I'm only going to use 2 decimal places. You could take the entire fraction and put it in here in parentheses and it would work. You could do 247 divided by 255 and you can have this entire string be in there. Or I'm sorry, this entire float. And my last one's 54, so 54 divided by 255 gives us 0.21. I'm going to go ahead and put that value in here. 0.21. Alright, so this will be very, very close to the color that I picked for my highlight. Alright, I'll go back into Unity. No errors. Playtest. When I put my cursor over it, get that yellow color. When I take it off, it goes back to white. Pretty cool. Alright, so just need to do a little bit of calculation there to get the decimals to be close to what you want. Again, just write down what your R, G, and B values are, divide them by 255, and that's how you come up with these decimal numbers. If we want the button to actually do something, when we click on it, we need a new method. So we're going to do void on mouse, and now we have 2 options. We have mouse down, which means when the mouse is clicked down, or when the mouse is let up. Okay, I'm going to choose let up because that gives time for the mouse down action to actually create a sound, which we'll get into later. On mouse up is when we want the scene to switch. So we're going to say application dot load level, and we're going to tell it which level to load. We are going to load the level select. However, for now, I'm going to go ahead and type this in, level select. But since we haven't created this level yet, I'm just going to comment this out. And instead, I'm going to put in a debug message just to show or test and make sure that this is actually working. So level selected should load with 3 dots. Let's change level select scene should load. Alright, so if this message displays, that means that it's working correctly and the level will load eventually once we go ahead and work this code in. Alright, so I'll let that compile, playtest, still getting the color change. When I click on play, notice we have our debug message down here. No errors, and it's working correctly. Alright, if you want to, go ahead and code this out. It's not very complex here. I think you guys should be able to do this. Again, if you can't get it, I'll show you in a bit. This is what my code looks like with comments. Yours might be a little different. Wording doesn't need to be perfect. So we've created this script, but it only works for the play button. Alright, so we need to tell it to do different functions when each button is clicked. So we're basically going to reuse this code that we put in down here, but we're going to put in if statements. So if GameObject.name. So if the name of the game object, and now we need to go and you need to be very specific in what you've called the game object. So for example, my play button is play button, and it's capitalized. So if the name is play button, whatever you called your button, you want to use that same name here. And this is what I want to happen. So I'm going to cut this and paste it here. Again, Control X is cut, Control C is copy, Control V is paste. Those are your best friends when moving code around. Alright. So we need an else if GameObject.name is equal to, and now my next button is the settings button. And I'm going to paste that same code in, so we have that same block, only now this is going to be a little bit different. We still haven't created the settings screen, so I'm going to change this to settings. It's going to load the settings level, and then the settings scene should load. And then else if, our last option, GameObject.name is equal to quit button. And get rid of this white space here. So we will do application dot, and this is very easy, it's quit. Make sure you have parentheses after it because this is an actual event that the application is going to do. So when we click the quit button, it's going to quit the application. That's what this line of code means. Now, luckily, this line of code is ignored when we play test. So when you click the quit button, if you have this line of code in, it's actually not going to do anything. So to show that it works, we're going to do a similar debug message, and we're just going to say the game has quit. Alright, and that'll show that the button is actually working. Alright, I'll go ahead and put my comments in here. Alright, so this is what your script should look like after you've put in your comments. I'm going to go ahead and save that. We'll go back into Unity, play test. Play button's working. Whoops, we did not add the scripts to our other two buttons. So we got the play button, button controller script. When we click on quit button, it doesn't have that script. So we need to add it here, and also the settings button. Again, you can either drag it over into the inspector or drag it up to the object in the hierarchy view. Save scene, save project. Come back in, play, settings, quit. Looks like it's working. When I click quit, again, it's ignored, or the actual event is ignored, but it does show our debug message down here. When I click settings, again, we don't have our settings scene loaded up, but it does show the debug message saying that it's working. Same thing with play. Alright, so our buttons are working. Alright, and the last thing I'm going to show you today is how to import audio. But what I'm going to do is actually give you guys links to audio files that you can use in this project. They're just for testing purposes and education purposes, so if you want to use them in an actual game, I highly advise against it. However, they are free, so you can use them at will. Again, look in the YouTube video and I will provide the links there for you. They are in my Dropbox, so once you have the files downloaded and put in a safe place, we can go ahead and create a new folder for our audio assets. We'll go ahead and do that. So we have a new folder here, and this is where you want your audio files to be. So I'm going to right click, import new asset, and I'm going to locate my audio files. So I'm going to import this ARC MP3. Alright, so the ARC file has imported. Also going to import the other small sounds that we're going to use. Once you have your assets imported, you can test the sound files by just clicking on it and using the play button on the right hand side in the preview. So we're actually going to use these sounds for our buttons just to give a little bit more interaction and show the player that they have actually hovered over the button. Once you guys have all of your audio files imported, make sure that you turned the 3D sound off. We want it to be a 2D sound, because our camera is going to be in the same location in every single level, and we do not want the sound coming from different objects. We want it to be all next to the camera. So we don't want the sound to sound like it's far away sometimes and maybe closer other times. So we want to turn off 3D sound and then click apply for each of these sound files. The smaller one will happen almost instantaneously. For the long background music, that one may take a minute or two. So on this one, when you uncheck 3D sound and hit apply, just give it a minute and it will run through and turn it into 2D sound. When you're done with that, we will continue to use these audio files in the next tutorial.